Today in lesson 7, we're going to learn all about what absolute value tells us about a number. So this says determine each number's distance from 0. 3 is 3 away from 0. Negative 47.8 is 47.8 away from 0. Complete the warm-up. Two players take turns throwing rings at a number line. Who do you think would win? Player B wins round 1. Here's round 2. Player B wins again. Round 3. Player A wins this time. How do you think the winner is determined? In this one, A is 3 away from 0, and B is 4 away from 0. In the previous round, B was closer to 0 than A, and in the first round, B was closer to 0 than A was. The absolute value of a number is the distance between the number and 0 on a number line. So the absolute value is 3 because it's 3 away from 0. For this number, its absolute value is 4 because it is 4 away from 0. Now let's fill in the blanks in your book. The absolute value of a number is the distance between the number and 0 on the number line. So you can see B wins, and then A, because they are all closer to 0. Negative 1 and 1 have the same absolute value. You can see that the absolute value of negative 1 is 1 because it is 1 unit away from 0. And 1 has an absolute value of 1 because it is 1 unit away from 0. These bars on the side are called absolute value bars. It's not a 1, so when you are writing it in your book, if you're going to write the number 1, make sure that your absolute value bars are bigger than the numbers. We're going to evaluate the absolute value of 3. How far away is 3 from 0? Well, the distance between 0 and 3 is just 3. The distance between 0 and negative 3 is 3. Sometimes we get confused because we want to write the opposite, but absolute value is a distance, not the opposite of a number. Remember, the negative symbol represents the opposite of 3. If you were to tell your friend the distance between your house and their house, you might say the distance is 3 miles, but you wouldn't say it was negative 3 miles, even if you measured going the opposite direction. Distance is always measured with positive numbers. So let's go through the remaining problems to write the absolute value for these. Which equations are true? Choose all that apply. Is the absolute value of negative 4.5 negative 4.5? No. Distance is positive. Is the absolute value of 4.5 4.5? Yes. 4.5 is 4.5 away from 0. Is negative 4.5 4.5 away from 0? Yes. Is 4.5 negative 4.5 away from 0? No. Remember, the distance should be positive. This one says take the absolute value, that distance, and then do the opposite. Well, the absolute value of 4.5 is 4.5, and the opposite of 4.5 is negative 4.5. So E is a true statement because the negative is outside of the absolute value bars. Tell me what the absolute value of these numbers are as I go through, or you can say them in your head. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. As we move to the left, as we move toward 0, starting on the right-hand side, the absolute values decrease. If we start here and move towards the right, starting on the left, moving towards the right, the absolute value, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, they also decrease. If I start at 0 and move to the right, they're going to increase our absolute values. So it says when we move towards 0 from the right on the number line, so moving towards 0 from the right, the numbers decrease. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that gets smaller. And the absolute values, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, decrease. But as we move towards 0 coming from the left side, the numbers themselves increase. Negative 5, negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, that's increasing. But their absolute values, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, still decrease. Consider the following statements. There are 2 truths and 1 lie. Statement D. A number and its opposite have the same absolute value. Statement E. The absolute value of a positive number is a negative number. Statement F. A number's opposite can be greater than the number. Well, we know that 5 and negative 5 have the same absolute value, so this one is true. The absolute value of a positive number is a negative? No. Remember, distance should be measured using positive values. A number's opposite can be greater than the number. Well, negative 5's opposite is 5, and 5 is greater than negative 5, so this one is true. Statement E is a lie. Give a counter example to show that the lie you identified is a false statement. So we've got a number. Let's use negative 2 this time. The absolute value of negative 2 is positive 2. But we need a positive number. So the absolute value of 2 is also a positive, not a negative. 13. Consider these statements. Again, there's 2 truths and 1 lie. The absolute value of a negative number is always a positive number. That is true. All absolute value comes out positive. Why? The absolute value of a negative number that is close to 0 is less than the absolute value of a negative number that is far from 0. So let's pick one that's close. 1. But it has to be negative. That's absolute value is 1. This one's close to 0. One that is far from 0 could be like -20. Its absolute value is 20. This says the absolute value of a negative number close is less than the one that's far. 1 is less than 20, so this is true. The absolute value of a positive number is always greater than the absolute value of a negative number. No, that is false. The absolute value of a positive number. We want one that's a counterexample, so smaller than the absolute value of a negative number. How about 3? The absolute value of 3 is 3. The absolute value of -17 is 17. So it's not greater than this absolute value, it's less than. Consider the location of the number p on the number line. Determine the location of a number labeled q with an absolute value that is greater than the absolute value of the number p. So to have a greater absolute value, it needs to be farther from 0. Mark and label q on the number line. Q has a greater absolute value because it has a greater distance from 0. We could also place Q in the positive direction, but it needs to be farther down the line than P would be. Consider the location of a number P on a number line. Determine the location of a number Q with an absolute value that is less than the absolute value of the number P. Label it Q. So less absolute value means that it's closer to 0. We could put Q there. We could put Q here because the distance between these is shorter than the distance to P. That wraps up this lesson. Go ahead and check back here for more videos.